The maitre d' barely spared me a glance before shaking his head. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but there's no reservation under your name." I blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. That didn't make sense. That's impossible. I was invited to dinner with my husband's family. They should already be here. His smile was polite but firm. "I just checked. There's a reservation for 6 under Eleanor Hastings, but I'm afraid—" A sharp, all too familiar voice sliced through the conversation. "Oh, Vivian," that voice, that condescending, smug tone. I turned, and there she was, Eleanor Hastings, my mother-in-law, standing just a few feet away in a perfectly tailored designer suit. Her platinum blonde hair was styled to perfection, her lips painted in a smirk of cruel amusement. Behind her, my husband Nathan sat stiffly, his fingers gripping his fork. He didn't say a word. Isabel and Olivia, his sisters, leaned toward each other, whispering and smirking at my expense. I felt my stomach tighten, but I refused to let them see it. "I don't understand," I said, my voice calm. Eleanor's smirk widened. "Oh, sweetheart, I didn't think you'd actually show up." She let out a light, insincere chuckle. "This is a family dinner. A place like this?" She gestured grandly at the opulent restaurant, as if it were the Taj Mahal. "It's a bit out of your league, don't you think? Maybe a budget diner would suit you better." Isabel snickered into her wine glass. Olivia avoided my gaze. And Nathan? Nathan just sat there, silent. Not a single word of protest. Humiliation settled over me like a thick fog. I could feel the weight of the judgment in the room, the curious stares from nearby diners who were now fully invested in the unfolding drama. I should have expected this. I should have seen it coming. Eleanor had spent years making it abundantly clear that I wasn't good enough for her son. I hadn't grown up with wealth. I hadn't attended the right schools. I hadn't been born into their pristine, privileged world. From the moment Nathan and I got engaged, Eleanor had gone out of her way to make sure I knew I didn't belong. At first, it was subtle. The backhanded compliments, the accidental exclusion from family events, the extravagant gifts for Nathan while giving me nothing but a forced smile. But tonight was a whole new level of cruelty. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was planned. She had orchestrated the entire evening to humiliate me in front of my husband, his family, and a room full of strangers. And she was loving every second of it. But here's the thing. Humiliation only works if you let it. And I was done playing the fool. I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile, one that made Eleanor's expression falter just for a second. Then I turned to the maitre d'. "Would you be so kind as to ask the owner to come out?" My tone was smooth, effortless. Eleanor let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, please. Do you honestly think the owner of this place is going to come out just because you asked?" I turned back to her, meeting her gaze without flinching. "Yes, because the owner of this restaurant knows me very well. And in a few moments, my dear mother-in-law, you are going to learn a lesson you will never forget." Eleanor's smirk twitched, just slightly. But I saw it. She had spent years treating me like an outsider. But tonight she had escalated her game too far. The maitre d' hesitated. He looked unsure whether to humor me or dismiss me. But before he could make a decision, a deep, confident voice sliced through the tension. "Vivian." I turned just as Richard Beaumont, the owner of this very establishment, stepped into view. A man in his early 50s, Richard was the picture of refined elegance, salt and pepper hair, a perfectly tailored suit, and the quiet, effortless confidence of a man who knew exactly how much power he held. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly as she registered the way he looked at me. Not with dismissal, not with judgment, but with genuine warmth. "Richard," I greeted, my smile widening. "It's been a while." His gaze flickered from me to Eleanor, then to Nathan and his sisters, before settling back on me. "It has. What brings you here tonight?" I gestured toward the table where my in-laws sat, their smirks beginning to wane. Apparently, I wasn't included in the reservation. My tone was light, but the message was sharp as a knife. Richard's expression darkened slightly. He wasn't stupid. He knew exactly what was happening. Then, just as quickly, his lips curved into a polite smile. "That won't do at all." Eleanor scoffed, folding her arms. "Oh, come on. You don't just walk into a place like this and expect a table. This is a private dining establishment." Richard's expression remained unreadable. "You're absolutely right, Mrs. Hastings. This restaurant does not accept last-minute walk-ins." I braced myself for disappointment. But then, "But Vivian is not a walk-in," he continued smoothly. "She is family." The table went dead silent. Isabel nearly dropped her wine glass. Olivia's eyes darted between me and Richard, struggling to process what was happening. Nathan's grip on his silverware tightened, but, just like always, he said nothing. Eleanor's carefully curated composure cracked just slightly. "Family?" she repeated, her voice edged with disbelief. "You must be mistaken. Vivian is my son's wife. She has no connections to—" "Actually," I interrupted smoothly, "Richard and I go way back." Eleanor's gaze sharpened. "How?" I leaned forward slightly, just enough for the nearby diners to overhear. "Before I married Nathan, I worked in fine dining, and Richard, he was my mentor." The color drained from Eleanor's face. This question mark. This was not how she thought the night would go, and the best part? The night had only just begun. Eleanor's expression was pure, unfiltered rage. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her wineglass, her knuckles whitening as she struggled to maintain her carefully crafted composure. The waiter placed a beautifully plated amuse-bouche in front of me, something delicate, artfully arranged, and, most importantly, complimentary, courtesy of Richard. The aroma of truffle and butter wafted up. But the real delicacy of the evening wasn't the food. It was the moment. I picked up my fork, slicing effortlessly into the dish. Silence stretched across the table as I took a slow, deliberate bite, savoring every second of it. Across from me, Isabel and Olivia no longer smirked. Their amusement had turned into something else. Unease, maybe even discomfort. Nathan, as expected, remained silent, swirling the deep red liquid in his glass as if it held the answers to his rapidly crumbling world. But Eleanor? Oh, Eleanor was not the type to go down without a fight. She let out a forced chuckle and turned to Richard. "How very generous of you, Richard. But I must say, it's quite the coincidence that Vivian happens to have such a connection here." Richard, ever the picture of calm professionalism, simply shrugged. "Not a coincidence at all, Mrs. Hastings. Vivian worked hard for her place in this industry. Talent like hers doesn't go unnoticed." Eleanor's nostrils flared. "I see. And yet, instead of pursuing this so-called talent, she's been living quite comfortably as my son's wife. Quite the career shift, wouldn't you say?" Ah, there it was, the classic Eleanor Hastings move. When cornered, insult. I dabbed the corner of my mouth with my napkin before setting it down, meeting her gaze head-on. "I wouldn't call it a shift, Eleanor. More of an expansion." Her lips twitched. "Expansion?" I tilted my head slightly, a small knowing smile forming. "Well, Unlike some, I don't believe in limiting myself to just one avenue of success. I built a career, then a business, and when the time came, I invested wisely. I took another bite, enjoying the growing look of confusion on her face. But of course you wouldn't know that, would you? The silence that followed was thick, charged. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on the table, wrapping around my in-laws like a vice. Eleanor's expression barely wavered, but I saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes, the first crack in her otherwise impenetrable wall. Nathan finally spoke, his voice strained. "Vivian," I held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "No, Nathan, not now." He flinched, shutting his mouth almost immediately. The man who had sat quietly as his mother tried to humiliate me in front of an entire restaurant now suddenly wanted to mediate. Too little, too late. Eleanor, still grasping for control, scoffed. "You act as though you've built some sort of empire, dear." I leaned forward, my voice smooth. "Eleanor, did you ever stop to wonder where Nathan got the capital for his business ventures?" She blinked. "Excuse me?" Isabel and Olivia's heads snapped toward their mother, their previous smugness now replaced with something much more interesting. Concern. Nathan, as expected, refused to meet my gaze. I sighed dramatically, feigning patience. You always assumed Nathan was the successful one, that he was the provider, the businessman, the one who made everything work. But the truth is, I took a sip of my wine, letting the words sink in. Nathan didn't fund his first investments. I did, the air shifted. Isabel let out a small gasp. Olivia's jaw nearly dropped. Even the waiter, who had just returned to refill my glass, hesitated for a split second before continuing his task. Eleanor, however, remained dead still. The only sign of her distress was the way her fingers twitched against the tablecloth. "That's ridiculous." I placed my glass down with a soft clink. "Believe what you want, but the contracts are in my name. The accounts are tied to my assets." I took another slow sip. "The real question is, what happens when I pull my support?" Nathan stiffened. "Vivian, let's not do this here." I turned to him, the man who had let his mother degrade me time and time again. "No, Nathan, let's do this here, right now, in front of the family that thinks they know everything about us." Eleanor's forced composure cracked. "You're bluffing." I leaned back, relaxed, at ease. Am I? Richard, who had been silently watching the exchange, finally spoke up. "Mrs. Hastings, perhaps now would be a good time to acknowledge that Vivian isn't quite as dependent on your son as you once assumed." Eleanor said nothing. For the first time since I had met her, Eleanor Hastings was speechless. I smiled and picked up my fork. "Well, this has been delightful, but let's not let the food get cold." Eleanor's expression was a mask of barely contained fury. Her jaw tightened, and the delicate stem of her wine glass trembled under the pressure of her grip. Across the table, Isabel and Olivia exchanged wary glances, their earlier amusement now replaced with uncertainty. Nathan, as expected, remained silent, staring into his wine glass as if the swirling liquid held the answers to his ever-growing problems. I let the tension settle, basking in the delicious silence. Then, with practiced ease, I picked up my fork and sliced through the exquisite dish in front of me. The delicate aroma of truffle butter and aged parmesan filled the air as I took a slow, deliberate bite. But the real satisfaction wasn't the food, it was this moment, the shift, the realization that, for the first time, Eleanor Hastings was on the defensive. She wouldn't accept that lightly. Eleanor took a slow sip of her own wine before setting the glass down with a little too much force, the soft clink against the tablecloth barely masking her frustration. "Well," she said, forcing a tight smile. I suppose it's only natural that someone like you would know people in hospitality. I arched a brow. Hospitality? Eleanor gave an exaggerated wave of her hand, feigning politeness. You know, service industries, waiting tables, kitchen work, not exactly the kind of careers we're accustomed to in this family. Ah, there it was, the real reason she had orchestrated this entire charade. It wasn't just about excluding me from dinner. It was about reminding me, in front of everyone, that in her eyes, I was still just a woman who had worked her way up from nothing. I took another sip of wine before responding, my voice calm. You say that like it's a bad thing. Eleanor's eyes flickered with something, annoyance, maybe even the faintest trace of surprise. She had expected me to be rattled, but I wasn't, not anymore. She pressed on, her tone light, but her words razor sharp. I simply meant that it must have been quite an adjustment for you marrying into a family like ours. And still, Nathan said nothing. I turned my gaze to him, studying the way he refused to meet my eyes. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about Eleanor's cruelty. This was about his silence. Because this wasn't the first time Eleanor had tried to humiliate me. It had happened at our wedding, when she conveniently forgot to invite my family to the rehearsal dinner. It had happened at Christmas, when she gifted me a cookbook titled Simple Recipes for the Clueless Wife, in front of a room full of people. It had happened last summer when she made a snide remark about how fortunate I was that Nathan had taken a chance on me. And every single time Nathan had let it slide. And every single time I had told myself it wasn't worth the fight. I had told myself that I didn't want to be the cause of conflict. But this was different. This wasn't just a passive-aggressive remark. This was an orchestrated public attempt to humiliate me. And he had let it happen. I set my wine glass down, slow, deliberate. Then I leaned forward, resting my elbows lightly on the table. Eleanor, I said, my voice smooth, even. Do you know what the difference is between you and me? She tilted her head slightly, curiosity flickering in her eyes despite herself. I smiled. I worked for everything I have. A sharp, stunned silence fell over the table. Eleanor's face hardened. Excuse me? I didn't blink. You heard me. Isabel stiffened. Olivia pressed her lips together, as if suppressing a laugh. Eleanor scoffed, reaching for her wine glass. Are you trying to imply that I haven't worked for what I have? I let the question hang in the air. Then, before she could formulate another condescending response, I added, I didn't marry into wealth. I didn't inherit status. I built my career from the ground up. And yet, I gestured at the table. Here we are, sitting in the same restaurant, eating the same food, with the same level of respect from the owner. Eleanor's fingers curled around her napkin, her knuckles white. Isabel and Olivia weren't laughing anymore. And Nathan? He looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. For the first time since I had met Eleanor, I saw something flicker across her face. It wasn't anger. It was fear. Because she had spent years trying to convince herself that I didn't belong, that I was lesser, that I was just some gold digger who had latched onto her son. But now she was starting to realize the truth. And the truth was that I was not someone she could break. I picked up my fork again, casually cutting into my dish. Oh, and Eleanor? She exhaled sharply through her nose, clearly furious that I had stolen control of the conversation. What? I smiled, slow and deliberate. You should be careful about who you look down on. I speared another bite of food, placed it in my mouth, and chewed slowly before adding, You never know who might end up above you. The tension at the table was suffocating. Eleanor, always poised, always in control, sat stone-faced. Her fingers curled so tightly around her wine glass that I half expected it to shatter. Nathan looked like he wanted to disappear into his seat. Isabel and Olivia were stealing glances at each other, unsure if they should intervene. And me? I had never felt more certain of my place. Eleanor had built her power on people bending to her will, on people being too afraid, too polite to put her in her place. But I wasn't afraid of her anymore. Eleanor took a slow, measured breath, composing herself before setting her glass down with a soft but deliberate click. "I see," she said finally, her voice deceptively smooth. "I suppose I should commend you, Vivian. You've managed to elevate yourself beyond your circumstances." I took another sip of wine, not giving her the satisfaction of a reaction. "But tell me," she continued, her lips curving into a saccharine smile, "if you're so independent, so self-made, why is it that my son is the one paying for your lifestyle?" Isabel let out a quiet gasp. Olivia shifted uncomfortably. "And Nathan?" Nathan flinched. Eleanor's smile sharpened. She could feel the eyes of the table on me now, waiting for my response. I set my glass down, my movements slow, deliberate. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, feigning confusion. Eleanor leaned forward, dropping her voice into a mocking whisper. "I mean, darling, that my son is the reason you can afford that lovely little boutique job of yours, isn't he? You don't actually need to work, yet you play pretend at having a career. How charming." And there it was, her final card, her last attempt to humiliate me beyond recovery. But what she didn't know? She had just played directly into my hands. Eleanor's face darkened, her polished mask of superiority now marred with something unfamiliar: doubt. For the first time, she wasn't the one in control of the conversation, and that realization settled over her like a weight she couldn't shake. Her fingers, still curled around the delicate stem of her wine glass, trembled ever so slightly. Across the table, Nathan looked utterly paralyzed, his grip on his fork tightening as if it were the only thing keeping him anchored to reality. Isabel and Olivia, always so eager to laugh at my expense, were now exchanging uneasy glances, their amusement completely erased. And me? I had never felt more certain of my place. Eleanor had spent years bending people to her will, wielding power not through force, but through subtle, manipulative precision. She expected compliance, not defiance. She was used to people swallowing their pride, backing down, letting her dictate their worth. But me? I wasn't afraid of her anymore. Eleanor exhaled slowly, composing herself before placing her glass down with an intentional, measured click. She folded her hands together, adopting the practiced elegance of a woman who had spent a lifetime perfecting the art of condescension. "I see," she said finally, her voice deceptively smooth. "I suppose I should commend you, Vivian. You've managed to elevate yourself beyond your circumstances." I took another sip of my wine, offering her nothing in return. No gratitude, no acknowledgement, just silence. She didn't like that. Her lips curled into a saccharine smile, the kind meant to slice rather than soothe. "But tell me," she continued, tilting her head ever so slightly, "if you're so independent, so self-made, why is it that my son is the one paying for your lifestyle?" The words landed like a well-aimed dagger. Isabel gasped quietly. Olivia shifted uncomfortably in her seat. And Nathan? Nathan flinched. Eleanor's smile sharpened. She savored the moment, knowing all eyes were on me now, waiting for a response. I set my glass down, my movements slow and deliberate. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, feigning curiosity. Eleanor leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice just enough to add a mocking whisper. I mean, darling, that my son is the reason you can afford that lovely little boutique job of yours, isn't he? You don't actually need to work, yet you play pretend at having a career. How charming! She tilted her head, that smug smirk returning to her face. You talk about self-sufficiency, but at the end of the day, you're still just someone my son supports. And there it was, her final card, the grand crescendo of the humiliation she had spent the entire evening orchestrating. She expected me to stammer, to falter, to feel small, but instead I laughed, not a quiet chuckle, not a nervous giggle, a full, genuine laugh. Eleanor's smirk faltered. I'm sorry, I said, still grinning as I placed my napkin back onto the table. Is something funny? Eleanor asked, her eyes narrowing. I let out a sigh, shaking my head slightly, almost pitying her. I just realized how truly out of touch you are, Eleanor. Her expression hardened. Excuse me? I turned to Nathan, my voice calm, deliberate. You think he supports me? I asked, arching a brow. That's adorable. Isabel let out a choked sound, covering her mouth in shock. Olivia blinked rapidly, struggling to process what she had just heard. And Nathan? Nathan went pale. Eleanor's smile dropped instantly. What are you talking about? She demanded. I sighed, swirling the wine in my glass. You still see Nathan as your little boy, don't you? I mused. The one in control, the provider, the man who rescued me from my lowly life. I tilted my head slightly. But let me tell you something, Eleanor. That's not how this marriage works. Her posture stiffened. You're lying. I leaned in just slightly, keeping my voice level, even. You want to know what's funny? I continued. Nathan's business, his investment projects, half of them were funded with my money. A stunned silence fell over the table. Eleanor's eyes widened, the carefully constructed world she had built in her mind beginning to shift. What? She whispered. I smiled, but this time there was no warmth in it. Nathan didn't build his career alone, I said, still speaking to her, but keeping my gaze locked on my husband. When he wanted to start investing, he didn't have the capital. I picked up my wine glass again. But I did. Eleanor's fingers twitched against the tablecloth. That's not possible. I shrugged. Believe what you want, but the reality is your son's success is built on my investments, my strategies, and my support. Isabel and Olivia turned to Nathan, waiting for him to deny it, to tell them I was lying. But Nathan? Nathan sat frozen in place. I shook my head, exhaling slowly. You think you can humiliate me by painting me as some dependent little housewife? I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. That's laughable. Because the truth, Eleanor, is that Nathan needs me far more than I need him. Eleanor's face turned a deep shade of red. Olivia looked like she was about to pass out. Isabel was completely speechless. And Nathan? For the first time all night, Nathan looked at me, not with anger, not with embarrassment, but with something that almost resembled fear, because he finally understood. I wasn't bluffing. I had just turned their world upside down. Nathan finally opened his mouth. His voice was weak, almost a croak. Vivian, maybe we should... I didn't let him finish. I raised a hand, cutting him off with a single sharp motion. No, Nathan. My voice was firm, steady. You don't get to... Maybe we should me right now, not after you sat here in silence while your mother tried to humiliate me. Eleanor's eyes flicked toward him, the triumphant gleam in them flickering just for a moment. And for the first time, she truly saw her son for what he was. Spineless. Weak. A man who sat by and watched while his wife was ridiculed, too cowardly to intervene. For the first time, Eleanor didn't look proud of him. She looked at him like he was small, like he was beneath her expectations, like he had failed her. It was a delicious reversal. I stood up, smoothing down my dress, my movements slow, deliberate. I think I'm done here. Eleanor's nostrils flared. You can't just... I didn't give her the satisfaction of finishing that sentence. I turned instead to Richard, who had been standing at a polite distance, observing everything with a knowing amusement. Richard, it was lovely seeing you. Thank you for the hospitality. He gave me a nod, his lips curling into the faintest of smirks. Always a pleasure, Vivian. Then I turned to Nathan. Are you coming? He hesitated. I watched his eyes flicker between me and his mother, the war playing out in his mind clear as day. But I already knew. I knew exactly what he was going to do because Nathan had never chosen me before, and he wasn't about to start now. Eleanor's lips curved into a smug smile, victory washing over her face. But I smiled right back, because what she didn't realize was that I had already made my choice too. And soon she was going to regret ever thinking she could put me in my place. Nathan didn't follow me. I hadn't expected him to. As I stepped outside, the cool night air brushed against my skin, but I barely felt it. My mind was sharp, clear. This dinner had been a long overdue wake-up call, a moment of truth that had been years in the making. And now it was time to act. I pulled out my phone, my fingers steady as I typed a message. Me. We're moving forward. Initiate the process first thing tomorrow. Within seconds, my phone buzzed with a reply. Attorney. Understood. You'll have the first draft of the divorce settlement by noon. I exhaled slowly, staring at the screen. Divorce. The word didn't scare me. What did scare me was how long I had ignored the truth, that Nathan had never been on my side, that for years I had been alone in my own marriage. But not anymore. Tonight had been the final push I needed. And Eleanor? She had no idea just how thoroughly I was about to upend the life she had spent so long trying to control. I arrived home before Nathan, which gave me just enough time to do what needed to be done. First, I walked into his office, the one he used for his investments. I opened the safe. The passcode? He had never changed it. A mistake. Inside were all the financial documents, bank statements, investment portfolios, business agreements, and the one I was most interested in, the contract that tied his most lucrative investment to my initial fund. I picked it up, my eyes scanning the familiar legal jargon. This was it, the document that proved I was the financial backbone of his entire empire. Eleanor thought her son was the great businessman of the family. But without me, he was nothing. I took a quick photo of the contract, then placed it back exactly where I found it. No need to take it, not when I already had what I needed. Next, I went to the bedroom. I pulled out a suitcase and began packing, not in anger, not in haste, but in absolute clarity. This wasn't an emotional decision. This was a calculated departure. By the time Nathan walked through the front door, I was sitting on the couch, my suitcase beside me, waiting. He paused in the doorway, staring at me like he wasn't sure if he had come home to the right house. Vivian? I tilted my head slightly. Took you long enough. His eyes darted to the suitcase. His breath caught. What are you doing? I stood up, calm and controlled. Nathan's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. You made your choice, Nathan. My voice was smooth. Back at the restaurant, when your mother humiliated me again, and you just sat there. His jaw tensed. I was trying to keep the peace. I laughed. Peace, Nathan? Your mother planned this entire dinner to embarrass me. She booked a table and left me off the reservation on purpose. She insulted me. She tried to make me feel like I didn't belong. I took a step closer, watching as he shrank slightly under my gaze. And you let her. Nathan rubbed the back of his neck, clearly flustered. It's complicated, Vivian. You know how she is. I exhaled, shaking my head. No, Nathan. And for the first time in years, my voice was filled with nothing but certainty. It's simple. Nathan's eyes snapped to mine, offended, but it didn't matter, because it was the truth. You're weak. I let the words settle between us, unshaken by the flicker of hurt that crossed his face. You've spent our entire marriage letting your mother dictate how you treat me. I was patient, Nathan. I gave you so many chances. I shook my head slowly. But tonight, I finally saw you for what you really are. Nathan swallowed hard, his Nathan's apple bobbing. Vivian, let's just talk about this. I sighed, tired, but not in the way he thought. That's the problem, Nathan. There's nothing left to talk about. I picked up my suitcase and brushed past him. The finality of the moment settled deep in my bones. And then, just as I reached the door, I'll fight you on this. I stopped, turning slowly. What? His face had darkened, his voice low and desperate. If you think you're walking away from this marriage with half of everything, you're mistaken. I stared at him for a moment, then let a small smile play at my lips. Oh, Nathan, I said softly, you really should read your own contracts more carefully. Confusion flickered across his face. What? I cut him off, stepping closer, lowering my voice just enough for him to feel the weight of what I was about to say. You wouldn't even have half of what you own if it weren't for me. His mouth parted slightly, his mind working to catch up, but I didn't give him the time. You used my money to build your investments, and guess what? I let the moment hang, savoring the silence before delivering the final blow. I have all the paperwork to prove it. His face drained of color. He staggered back a step, his hand gripping the counter as if steadying himself from the impact of my words. Nathan thought he could threaten me. He had no idea who he was dealing with. He stood frozen in the doorway, his jaw clenched, his body rigid. I could see the exact moment realization crashed over him. I wasn't just leaving him. I was taking everything he thought he controlled. His mouth opened, probably to argue, beg, manipulate me like he always had, but I didn't give him the chance. I'll be staying at the penthouse, I said, adjusting the strap of my bag over my shoulder. His brows furrowed. What penthouse? I smiled, tilting my head slightly. Oh, Nathan, the one you think you own. His confusion turned into horror. The downtown penthouse? His voice was uneven, uncertain in a way I had never heard before. The one I bought under my name? I finished smoothly. Yes. His nostrils flared. You wouldn't. I met his gaze, unbothered. I already did. I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope, tossing it onto the counter. He hesitated before grabbing it with shaking hands. His eyes skimmed the document, his breathing turning shallow. This, he swallowed, his voice barely above a whisper. This says you own 51% of my investment firm. I nodded. Correct. His chest rose and fell unevenly. That's impossible. I shrugged. Not really. I was the initial investor, remember? I never transferred ownership over to you. You just assumed I did because I let out a small chuckle. Well, you never actually read the contracts, did you? I watched as panic took over his features, his mind racing, probably wondering how the hell he had let this happen. Vivian, he said, his voice tight, you can't just take this from me. I tilted my head. I'm not taking anything. I met his eyes. I already own it. He staggered back, gripping the counter. This was the man who had let his mother humiliate me, who had sat in cowardly silence while she tried to strip me of my dignity. Now he was the one powerless. His voice was a whisper. I don't understand. Why? And for the first time in years, I felt it. Freedom. I exhaled slowly, the corners of my lips lifting ever so slightly. Because, Nathan, I said, savoring every syllable, I finally see my worth. Then, without another word, I walked out of the house for the last time. 1 month later. I sat in the penthouse, my legs crossed, a glass of champagne in my hand. Across from me, my attorney smiled as she slid the finalized divorce papers toward me. It's official. You're free. I exhaled slowly, running my fingers over the thick paper. Free. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind. The legal battle had been short and brutal. Nathan had tried to fight, of course. He had stormed into meetings, demanded a better deal, threatened to take me to court. But the moment my lawyers laid out the documents proving I was the true majority shareholder in his firm, his arrogance collapsed. Eleanor had tried to intervene, of course. She had called me furious, accusing me of being a gold-digging snake. I had simply responded, if you raised him better, this wouldn't have happened. Then I blocked her number, because Eleanor Hastings was no longer my problem. I lifted the champagne glass to my lips, savoring the moment. And then, as if the universe wanted to gift me one last laugh, my phone buzzed. Nathan, can we talk? I smirked, setting the glass down. Because the truth was, there was nothing left to say. I stared at the message on my phone, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Nathan, can we talk? I smirked. Talk? About what? I typed back. About what? And waited. A long pause. Then, Nathan, I don't know what to do. I exhaled, shaking my head. It was almost pathetic. For years I had waited for Nathan to show up for me, to be the man I thought I married, to fight for me the way I had fought for him. But now I saw him for exactly who he was, a man who had never stood on his own, always hiding behind his mother's power, too weak to build anything by himself. And the irony? He needed me now more than ever. But I didn't need him at all. I typed one final message. That's not my problem anymore. Then I blocked his number. For the first time in my life, I chose myself. And that was the most powerful thing I had ever done. One of the most powerful lessons from this story is the importance of self-worth and knowing when to walk away from toxic relationships. Too often, people stay in situations where they're undervalued, disrespected, or treated as if they don't belong, whether in relationships, careers, or family dynamics. Vivian's journey is a testament to standing up for oneself, recognizing one's value, and refusing to allow others to define her worth. For many, especially those who have spent years sacrificing for others, it can be difficult to put themselves first. But this story highlights a crucial truth. Self-respect is non-negotiable. If someone constantly diminishes you, if they refuse to support you, and if they force you into a role that undermines your contributions, then you owe it to yourself to reclaim your power. Vivian's strength didn't come from revenge. It came from realizing that she had always been in control. She didn't need validation from her husband or his family. She had built something of her own, and when the time came, she walked away with her head held high. This is a reminder to all of us. Never let anyone make you feel small. Know your worth, stand firm, and when necessary, choose yourself.